Watson said. Your theory about the weighted coat certainly sounds possible. Holmes answered, we shall accept it only as a working hypothesis until we find something better. Hugh Boone had been arrested, but police found no previous serious offense beyond professional begging. His life appeared quiet, and no evidence directly linked him to violence. Holmes said, 4 questions remain. Why did Neville enter the opium den? What happened upstairs? Where is he now? What part did Boone play? I cannot recall another case that looked so simple at first and yet presented such difficulties. As Holmes finished, our dog cart left the last London houses and passed between country hedges. We crossed 2 villages and approached Lee. Holmes pointed and said, see that light among the trees? That is the Cedars. Beside that lamp sits a woman whose anxious ears have probably already caught the sound of our horse. Watson asked, why are you not conducting the case from Baker Street? Holmes answered, many inquiries must be made here. Mrs. St. Clair has kindly provided rooms for me and will welcome my friend and colleague. He disliked returning without news of her husband. A stable boy took the horse as we stopped before the large villa and walked up the curving gravel drive. The front door opened before we reached it. A small, fair-haired woman stood outlined in the bright doorway, wearing a light dress with soft pink material at her neck and wrists. She leaned forward with one hand raised, eager eyes and parted lips asking the question before she spoke. Mrs. St. Clair cried, well, do you have good news? Holmes answered, none. Mrs. St. Clair asked, no bad news either? Holmes said, no. She answered, thank God for that. Come in, you must be weary after such a long day. Holmes said, this is my friend Dr. Watson, who has been a vital help in several cases. Mrs. St. Clair pressed my hand and said, I am delighted to see you. Please forgive anything lacking in our arrangements after this sudden blow. In the dining room, Mrs. St. Clair said, Mr. Holmes, I want to ask plain questions and receive plain answers. Do not protect my feelings. I am neither hysterical nor likely to faint. Mrs. St. Clair asked, in your heart, do you truly believe Neville is alive? Holmes hesitated, then answered, frankly, madam, I do not. Mrs. St. Clair asked, you think he died on Monday, perhaps murdered? Holmes replied, I believe he died on Monday. I cannot yet say with certainty that he was murdered. Mrs. St. Clair asked, then how do you explain the letter I received from him today? Holmes sprang from his chair and cried, what? May I see it? The envelope was coarse and bore a Gravesend postmark from that day, although midnight had passed while we spoke. Holmes smoothed it under the lamp while I stood behind his shoulder and followed every part of the examination. Holmes said, the address is not in Neville's hand. Notice that your name is deep black, while the rest is gray from blotting paper. The difference shows a pause. The sender wrote your name, then had to ask for the address before completing it. That means he did not know it. A trifle, perhaps, but nothing is more important than trifles. Inside was Neville's signet ring and a pencil note written on the flyleaf torn from an octavo book. The paper had no watermark. The note read, Dearest, do not be frightened. All will come well. There is a huge error which may take some time to correct. Wait in patience. Neville. Mrs. St. Clair said, the note is Neville's hurried hand. It differs from his careful writing, but I know it perfectly, and have no doubt. Holmes said, the sender left a dirty thumbprint, and the flap was moistened by someone who chews tobacco. Another person may have posted the note. Mrs. St. Clair said, then he must be alive. Holmes answered, the clouds are lighter, but I would not say the danger is over. Holmes continued, the note could be a clever forgery supported by a stolen ring, or Neville may have written it on Monday, and suffered harm before someone finally posted it today. Mrs. St. Clair insisted Neville lives. The sympathy between us is so strong that I would know if evil, especially death, had come to him. She continued, that very morning he cut his finger upstairs while I sat in the dining room. I heard no cry and received no message, yet I suddenly knew something had happened and ran directly to him. Mrs. St. Clair asked, could I feel so small an injury and yet know nothing of his death? Holmes answered, a woman's impression may sometimes be more valuable than an analytical conclusion, and the note strongly supports you. Holmes asked, but if your husband is alive and able to write, why does he remain away from his wife and children? Mrs. St. Clair replied, I cannot imagine. It is unthinkable. Holmes asked, did Neville say anything strange before leaving on Monday, and were you surprised to see him in Swandam Lane, Mrs. St. Claire answered. He said nothing unusual, and I was extremely surprised. Holmes asked, The window was open, so he might have called to you. Was it a clear cry for help? She replied, It was only a cry, but he waved both hands, so I believed he needed help. Holmes said, It might instead have been a cry of surprise. Seeing you unexpectedly could make him throw up both hands, perhaps to hide his face. Mrs. Street Clair said, I thought he was pulled back because he disappeared so suddenly. Holmes asked, But you saw no second person? She answered, No. Holmes said, Then he might have leaped back by himself. Mrs. Street Clair said, He wore his ordinary dark coat, but I clearly saw his bare throat without collar or tie. He never mentioned Swandam Lane and never showed any sign of taking opium. Holmes said, Thank you. Those are exactly the points I needed to establish. Let us eat and rest, for tomorrow may be busy. The guest room contained 2 beds. I was exhausted and soon lay down, but Holmes prepared for an all-night examination of the facts. He removed his coat and waistcoat, put on a large blue dressing gown, and collected pillows from the beds and cushions from the sofa and chairs. From them he built an Eastern-style seat, then placed an ounce of strong shag tobacco and a box of matches before him. For hours he sat motionless with an old briar pipe between his lips, staring at one corner of the ceiling while smoke filled the room. The dim lamp picked out his sharp profile, but his expression revealed nothing about the direction of his thoughts. When I fell asleep, Holmes was still thinking. I woke after sunrise to find him in the same position, the room dense with smoke, and the entire pile of tobacco gone. The dark, troubled expression had vanished. Holmes's eyes shone as he asked, Awake, Watson. Are you ready for an early drive? Watson answered, Certainly. It was only 4:25. Holmes woke the stable boy and said, Dress quickly. No one else is stirring, and I want to test a theory. Holmes said, You are standing beside one of the greatest fools in Europe. I deserve to be kicked to Charing Cross for missing it so long, but now I believe I have the key. Watson asked, Where did you find it? Holmes answered, In the bathroom. Holmes smiled at my disbelief and said, I am not joking. I took the key from the bathroom and put it in this Gladstone bag. Come, and we shall see whether it fits the lock. We drove away before the household awoke. We drove quickly through silent villas toward London. Country carts carrying vegetables were among the few vehicles moving at that hour. Holmes said, I have been as blind as a mole, Watson, but learning wisdom late is better than never learning it at all. We crossed the river by Waterloo Bridge, went up Wellington Street, turned sharply, and reached Bow Street Police Station as the city's earliest residents began looking sleepily from their windows. The officers recognized Holmes. He asked for Inspector Bradstreet, who received us in a small office with a large ledger and wall telephone. Holmes said, I have come about Hugh Boone, the beggar connected with Neville Street Clair's disappearance. Is he here? Bradstreet answered. He has been remanded and is in the cells. Holmes asked, Does he give trouble? Bradstreet said, No, but he is filthy. We can scarcely make him wash his hands, and his face is black as a tinker's. He badly needs a prison bath. Holmes said, I should very much like to see him, and I shall take my bag. Bradstreet replied, Certainly. Come this way. He led us through a barred door, down a winding stair, and into a whitewashed corridor. Through the panel of the third cell, we saw Boone sleeping heavily. He wore a torn coat and colored shirt, and grime covered his face. The dirt could not hide the broad scar from eye to chin, the contracted upper lip exposing 3 teeth, or the thick, bright red hair hanging over his forehead. Bradstreet joked, He is a beauty, is he not? Holmes answered, He certainly needs washing. I suspected as much and brought the proper tool. He opened his bag and revealed a large bath sponge. The inspector quietly unlocked the cell. Holmes wet the sponge from the water jug and rubbed it firmly across the sleeping man's face twice. Holmes announced, Let me introduce Mr. Neville Street Clair of Lee, Kent. Brown color came away under the sponge. The terrible scar and twisted lip disappeared with it. Holmes pulled off the tangled red wig. The ugly beggar became a pale, sad-faced, refined man with smooth skin and black hair. He sat upright, rubbed his eyes in sleepy confusion, then understood that his disguise was gone. He screamed and threw himself face down into the pillow. Bradstreet cried, Great heavens! It is the missing man. I know him from the photograph. I have served 27 years and never seen anything like this. Neville asked. What crime can you charge me with? If I am Neville St. Clair, I cannot have murdered myself, and therefore you are detaining me unlawfully. Holmes said, No crime has occurred, but you have made a very serious error. You should have trusted your wife. Neville groaned. It was not my wife I feared, it was the children. God help me. I could not bear for them to learn that their father was Hugh Boone. Holmes said, A court hearing would make everything public. But if you give the police a complete and convincing account, Inspector Bradstreet can submit it to the authorities, and perhaps the case need never reach court or the newspapers. Bradstreet agreed to record the statement. Neville cried, God bless you. I would endure prison, even execution, rather than leave this unexplained disgrace as a stain upon my children. Neville began. My father was a schoolmaster in Chesterfield, and I received an excellent education. As a young man I traveled, worked as an actor, and later became a reporter for a London evening newspaper. My editor once requested a series about begging in London. I volunteered because only personal experience could give me accurate material. Stage work had taught me professional makeup. I darkened my skin, made a convincing scar, pulled one side of my lip upward with flesh-colored plaster, added a red wig, and dressed in carefully chosen rags. Pretending to sell matches, I sat in the city as a beggar for 7 hours. That evening I counted 26 shillings and fourpence, far more than I had expected. I wrote the articles and returned to reporting. Later, after guaranteeing a friend's bill, I suddenly faced a demand for £25. I obtained 2 weeks from the creditor and leave from the newspaper. 10 days of begging in disguise produced enough money to pay the entire debt. Reporting paid me £2 a week, while sitting still in makeup could earn the same amount in 1 day. My pride fought for a long time, but the money finally won. I resigned from the newspaper and became Hugh Boone. The scarred face drew pity, while quick replies made me a recognized figure in the city. Only the Lascar manager knew the truth. I rented his upstairs room, arrived as a respectable man, transformed into Boone each morning, and changed back before going home. I paid the Lascar well for secrecy. My makeup and wit brought an average income near £700 a year. Any day below £2 was a poor one. As my savings grew, I bought the Cedars and married. My wife believed I had legitimate city business and never suspected how our home was financed. Neville continued. On Monday I finished begging and was changing above the opium den when I looked out and saw my wife staring up from the street. I cried out and raised both arms to hide my face. Then I ordered the Lascar to block the stairs while I restored the Boone disguise. I stripped off my ordinary clothes, pulled on the beggar's rags, applied pigment and the false scar, and put on the red wig. Even my wife's eyes could not pierce the disguise. Then I realized police might search the room and discover my clothing. I threw open the window so violently that the small cut on my finger from that morning began bleeding again. The blood on the sill and floor came from that cut. No murder had taken place. I had already transferred the day's copper coins from my leather bag into the coat pockets. The coat was heavy when I threw it into the Thames. I meant to throw the remaining clothes after it, but police rushed upstairs before I had time. I could only hide the garments behind the curtain. To my relief, the officers did not identify me. Instead, they arrested Hugh Boone for murdering the very man hidden beneath the disguise. In custody, I kept my face dirty because washing would expose me. When no constable watched, I gave my signet ring and a hurried note to the Lascar and asked him to deliver them to my wife. Holmes said, The message reached her only yesterday. Neville cried, Good God, what a week of fear she must have endured. Bradstreet said, Police surveillance probably prevented the Lascar from posting it. He may have handed it to a sailor who forgot it for several days. Holmes added, That explains the Gravesend postmark and the dirty tobacco-chewing sender. Holmes asked, Have you never been prosecuted for begging? Neville answered, Many times, but what was a fine compared with my income? Bradstreet said, If the police keep this private, Hugh Boone must disappear permanently. If you beg again, everything will be revealed. Neville said, I swear by the most solemn oath that I shall never use the disguise again. Bradstreet answered, Then I believe the case can close without further action. Bradstreet said, We owe you thanks for clearing this up, Mr. Holmes. I wish I knew how you reached the answer. Holmes replied, I reached it by sitting on 5 pillows and consuming an ounce of shag tobacco. Come, Watson, if we drive to Baker Street now, we shall be just in time for breakfast.